Good day. Greetings, Earthling. Crazy old gringo here. Listen, I hope you enjoy this podcast. It's certainly got some controversial opinions that are in it. As usual, I base most of this on research that you can find at the blog post crazyoldgringo.mx. That's crazyoldgringo.mx. I hope you go there and read it because there are embedded links that will go into how I came up with the research and what I base these opinions and or ideas on. I hope that you enjoy it, but I hope that you've got opinions, ideas too, and that you leave comments wherever you can. And with that said, let's get on to the podcast.
Hey there. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be unpacking some really interesting ideas about social status.
Okay.
And how it plays out in relationships. We've got a thought-provoking blog post to guide us.
Okay.
How low status affects relationships and well-being by Crazy Old Gringo, posted just a few days ago.
Yeah, this one really grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
The author specifically looks at American expats in the Philippines,
Right.
which adds a whole other layer to this idea of status.
It makes you wonder, could moving to a different culture actually lower your perceived status,
Right.
even if it seems like you're gaining something in the process?
Yeah,
It's a fascinating paradox.
it is. And to make his case, the author brings up Jordan Peterson's work,
Okay.
particularly the analogy of lobsters
Uh-huh.
and their hierarchical social structures.
Okay, for those who haven't encountered the lobster thing before,
Right.
can you give us the quick version?
Sure. Peterson argues that, lobsters, humans, have a biologically ingrained hierarchy.
Okay.
He points to the fact that even lobsters experience something similar to serotonin fluctuations
Interesting.
based on their social standing.
Yeah.
The higher up they are, the more confident and less stressed they seem.
Huh.
And he suggests that this drive for status isn't just a human invention,
Okay.
but something deeply rooted in our evolutionary history.
So it's not just about keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
It's something more primal etched into our DNA.
That's the argument.
Wow.
And this ties into the author's main point about status contamination.
Okay.
The idea that associating with people perceived as lower status can negatively impact your own standing.
That's a pretty heavy concept.
It is.
It's like your status is somehow contagious.
In a way, yes.
Ah.
And the blog author uses some pretty vivid examples of how this might play out,
Okay.
particularly in those expat-Filipino relationships.
Oh.
He talks about expats showcasing their relationships on YouTube and how that can lead to backlash even from other expats.
It's interesting because you'd think someone moving to another country to be with someone they love
Yeah,
would be past worrying about what other people think.
right.
But maybe it's not that simple.
Right. Maybe there are deeper insecurities at play.
Okay.
Or a fear of being judged or ostracized by their own social group.
And this is where the author starts to bring in ideas about IQ
Yes.
and its relationship to status.
He cites world data statistics,
Okay.
highlighting the difference in average IQ and income between the Philippines and the United States.
Okay.
The Philippines averages around 83 for IQ and $2,330 for income,
Okay.
while the U.S. comes in at 97 for IQ and $49,873 for income.
And he connects those stats to arguments made by people like Charles Murray
Right.
and, again, Jordan Peterson, who suggests that IQ has a significant impact on income potential
Yeah.
and even things like crime rates.
It's a controversial topic for sure.
Sure.
And it's important to note that we're just presenting the ideas as laid out in the blog post.
Absolutely.
The relationship between IQ, income, and social outcomes is incredibly complex.
Of course.
And there are a lot of factors involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's definitely food for thought.
Yeah.
And the author uses this data to bolster his argument about status contamination in these expat relationships,
Great.
suggesting that some expats might be seeking partners from cultures with lower average IQs and incomes,
Yeah.
which could then negatively impact their own perceived status.
Yes. And he ties this into the concept of a belief hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a framework for understanding how our beliefs about ourselves and the world are organized.
Okay.
He argues that status contamination can destabilize this hierarchy.
So walk me through that.
Okay.
How would this destabilization actually work? What's the mechanism?
Imagine for a moment you've built your identity around certain beliefs
Okay.
about your intelligence,
Uh-huh.
your capabilities, your place in the world.
Okay. I can see that.
Then you enter a relationship with someone who is perceived, based on societal norms or statistics,
Right.
as having lower intelligence or a lower earning potential.
Okay.
This can create a kind of dissonance.
Because it challenges those deeply held beliefs about yourself.
Exactly. You might start to question your own judgment, your values, even your sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
It's like your internal compass gets thrown off.
And the author's saying that this internal struggle could then manifest in those negative judgments from others,
Yeah,
that people might see you as making a bad choice and distance themselves from you.
that's one way it could play out.
Yeah.
It's almost like a social feedback loop.
Yeah.
Your internal doubts fuel the negative perceptions of others, which further reinforces your own insecurities.
That's pretty bleak.
It is.
And I know the author brings up another interesting example.
Okay.
The U.S. military's policy on IQ for recruits.
Yes. He points out that the U.S. military has a minimum IQ requirement of 83 for recruits, which happens to be the average IQ in the Philippines.
And he seems to be implying that,
Well, he makes a rather bold statement suggesting that given the average IQ, there might be a limited range of employment options in the Philippines outside of domestic work.
okay, that's a pretty loaded statement.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's using this to further connect this idea of status contamination to the dynamics of these expat Filipino relationships,
Right.
maybe even suggesting that.
Well, he seems to imply that for some expats, the line between seeking a partner and seeking domestic help might become blurred,
Yeah.
adding another layer to this whole status equation.
That's a lot to unpack.
It
It's
is,
definitely pushing some buttons, and I can see how this blog post might be controversial.
for sure.
But let's step back for a moment and think about the psychology behind all of this.
Okay.
If someone's sense of self is so tied to their perceived status,
Right.
what's really going on there?
That's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of why this status contamination idea is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It suggests that we're not just individuals moving through the world, but rather nodes in a complex social network.
Right.
Our connections, the people we surround ourselves with,
Yeah.
they all contribute to how others perceive us
Right.
and how we perceive ourselves.
It's almost like our social circles become a mirror reflecting back our own status,
Exactly.
or at least the status we aspire to.
And if that reflection suddenly becomes distorted,
Right.
if we start to associate with people who are seen as lower on the social ladder, it can create a sense of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Our actions don't align with our beliefs about who we are
Yeah.
or who we want to be.
And that can be really uncomfortable psychologically speaking.
Absolutely.
It can lead to those feelings of self-doubt and insecurity that the author described.
Right. And this is the things can get tricky.
Okay.
Some people might double down on their beliefs,
Yeah.
maybe even distancing themselves from those who challenge their sense of status.
Because admitting they were wrong about a person or relationship
Right.
would mean questioning their entire belief hierarchy.
It's possible. Or they might look for external validation, trying to prove to others that their choice of partner doesn't diminish their own worth.
It's almost like they're trying to control the narrative to manage the perceptions of others.
Right.
So they can maintain their own sense of status.
That's a really insightful observation.
Nice.
And it highlights the fact that this isn't just about individual psychology, but also about the social pressures and expectations that shape our behavior.
It makes you wonder how much of this is driven by a genuine desire for connection,
Right.
and how much is about maintaining a certain image or social standing.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to separate the two?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's a simple answer.
Right.
Human motivations are complex and often intertwined.
But I think it's fair to say that status is a powerful force.
Yeah,
Whether we're conscious of it or not,
for sure.
it shapes our choices, our relationships, and ultimately our sense of self.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Yeah.
Recognizing that status is a pervasive aspect of human interaction.
Uh-huh.
It's not always about money or power either.
Right.
It can be about things like education, social skills,
Okay.
even physical appearance.
It's about anything that society deems valuable or desirable.
Exactly.
And it can shift depending on the context.
Right.
What might be high status in one culture could be completely irrelevant in another.
Exactly. And that's what makes the expat experience so interesting in this context.
Yeah.
You're essentially navigating two different status systems,
Uh-huh.
trying to reconcile the values and expectations of your home culture
Yeah.
with those of your adopted culture.
And that can create all sorts of internal and external conflicts, as the author points out.
Yes, and it brings us back to that question of motivation.
Oh, yeah.
Why are these expats choosing to relocate to the Philippines?
Right.
Is it purely for love?
Yeah.
Or are there other factors at play, like a desire for adventure, a lower cost of living,
Uh-huh.
or even, as the author suggests, a perceived elevation in status?
And if it is about status, is it a conscious choice
Yeah.
or something more subconscious?
That's a good question.
Are they aware of the potential for status contamination, or are they willfully ignoring it?
I think it's likely a combination of factors, both conscious and unconscious.
Okay.
We all have desires and motivations that we might not fully understand.
Right.
And sometimes our actions don't align with our stated beliefs.
It's the human condition, right?
Yeah.
We're complex creatures driven by a mix of biology, psychology, and social conditioning.
Precisely. And I think that's what makes this whole discussion so thought-provoking.
Uh-huh.
It challenges us to examine our own motivations, to question our assumptions about status,
Okay.
and to consider the impact of our choices not just on ourselves, but on the people around us.
And the author leaves us with a really powerful question to ponder. He asks if seeking connection across cultures, even with these potential status differences, ultimately leads to a more fulfilling life. Or does it risk social isolation and a diminished sense of self-worth?
Yeah.
It's like he's challenging us to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper implications of these choices.
It's a question that resonates on so many levels, don't you think?
Yeah.
It forces us to confront our own values,
Right.
our priorities, and what truly matters to us in relationships and in life.
It does. It's easy to get caught up in the external markers of success,
Right.
the things that society tells us are important.
Yeah.
But this blog post and our conversation is making me think about the trade-offs we make in pursuit of those things.
Right.
What are we sacrificing in terms of genuine connection,
Yeah.
personal growth, and even happiness?
I think that's a crucial point. We often talk about status as if it's a ladder to be climbed,
Yeah.
a game to be won.
Right.
But what if true fulfillment lies in something else entirely?
Okay.
What if it's about finding meaning and purpose in our relationships, regardless of where they fall on the social hierarchy?
That's a really powerful idea. It's almost like we need to redefine what it means to win at life.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not about having the most impressive job title or the biggest house,
Right.
but about cultivating a sense of belonging, purpose, and genuine connection with others.
I couldn't agree more. And I think this applies not just to romantic relationships, but to all of our social interactions.
Right.
Are we choosing our friends based on shared values and interests?
Yeah.
Or are we letting status anxieties dictate who we allow into our inner circle?
So how do we break free from this status trap?
That's the question.
How do we learn to value people for who they are, not for what they represent in terms of social standing?
I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
By understanding the subtle ways in which status influences our perceptions and behaviors,
Right.
we can start to make more conscious choices.
So it's about recognizing those moments when we're making judgments based on superficial criteria
Exactly.
and challenging ourselves to look deeper.
And it's about being willing to step outside of our comfort zones,
Okay.
to connect with people from different backgrounds and walks of life.
Yeah.
We might be surprised by the richness and depth of those connections.
That's a great reminder. It's easy to get stuck in our own social bubbles,
Right?
surrounded by people who reinforce our existing beliefs and values.
Yeah.
But true growth often happens when we challenge those beliefs and expose ourselves to different perspectives.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Yeah.
So for our listener out there, as you go about your day, we encourage you to think about the role that status plays in your own life.
Yeah.
Are you letting it dictate your choices in relationships, friendships, or even career paths?
Right.
Are you seeking validation from external sources?
Hmm.
Or are you finding fulfillment in your own unique journey?
It's a lifelong exploration, really,
Yeah.
and there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But by being mindful of these dynamics, we can create more authentic connections and live a life that is truly meaningful to us.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.